Hi everyone, Future Rail Productions here, and today we have another review. We are reviewing today the Lionel LionChief Polar Express. Before we get started talking about this model, let's talk about the real Polar Express. The Polar Express, otherwise known as Pure Marquette number 1225, is a 284 Berkshire that was built for the Pure Marquette Railway by the Lima Locomotive Works in Lima, Ohio. 1225 is one of the two surviving Pure Marquette 284 locomotives, the other being 1223, which is on display in Grand Haven, Michigan. 1225 was commissioned in 1941, and her build date completion was December 6, 1941, a day prior to the attacks on Pearl Harbor. The Pure Marquette used 1225 in regular service from the locomotive's construction in 1941 until the railroad merged into the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway in 1947. 1225 remained in use on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway until 1951, when she was sent to scrap in New Buffalo, Michigan. In 1955, Michigan State University trustee Forrest Ackers was asked by the C&O chairman Cyrus Eaton if the university would be interested in having a steam locomotive so that engineering students would have a piece of real equipment to study. Ackers thought it was a good idea and proposed the idea to university president John Hanna. John Hanna accepted the gift of the locomotive. When he told the dean of the College of Engineering about the gift, the dean said that the engineering department was not interested in an obsolete locomotive. John Hanna then called up Dr. Roland Baker, the director of the MSU Museum, and told him he was getting a locomotive. The C&O then instructed the yard master at New Buffalo to send an engine to the Wyoming shops for cosmetic restoration and repainting with the name Chesapeake and Ohio on the side. Number 1225 was the last engine in the line, i.e. easiest to get out. Baker received the gift of the locomotive in 1957 when it was brought to campus. The locomotive remained on static display near Spartan Stadium on the Michigan State campus in East Lansing, Michigan for a decade. While on display, a child by the name of Chris Van Allsburg used to stop by the locomotive on football weekends on his way to the game with his father. He later stated that the engine was the inspiration for his story, The Polar Express. During the time that Ackers was alive, till 1966, money was allocated to paint and display the engine. In 1969, a group of MSU students formed the Michigan State University Railroad Club as a railfan group. Steve Reeves, a student and part-time employee of the museum, whose responsibility was to display the engine on the football weekends, sent out a notice in the state news that the Railroad Club would be meeting. These early meetings did not discuss the restoration of the engine. Instead, they showed slides of engines various members had seen on trips across the U.S., most of which were diesels. In 1970, at the suggestion of Randy Paquette, I probably butchered that, the club discussed the possibility of restoring the locomotive to running condition and started on that goal in 1971 with Baker's permission. Baker later stated that he thought students being occupied with restoring a steam locomotive was far more in keeping with his idea that the university should be presenting than campus protests. Dr. Breslin, the university vice president, was not so sure. After the club started removing the sheet metal and exposing a rusty boiler, Breslin sent Baker to the engine with two messages. The first instruction was to paint the engine. The university needs to look good, even when it is being worked on. The second message was that the day the students stopped working on the engine is the day the torches would come out. The locomotive was safe as long as the students kept working on it. To emphasize, he had the hopper car next to the engine cut up the next week. In 1975, the students had fired up the boiler and blew 1225's whistle for the first time in 2 decades. In 1977, Dr. Edgar Hardin became the university interim president. Chuck Julian, the president of the MSU Railroad Club, went to his reception and made an appointment to see him. Hardin was asked about the engine's future. The Railroad Club had fired the engine and it was nearing operability. The university was not interested in running a locomotive, and if it was, it would be run by all university employees. He said if the Railroad Club wanted to run the engine, it needed to form a 501c3 corporation, and then the club would be given the engine. In that meeting, he also told the Chuck that the university was closing the Shaw Lane power plant and planned to pull up the tracks. The railroad had informed the university if they did not want to maintain a switch on a line that was not being used. With no switch, there was no need to keep the track. So they needed to move the engine fairly soon if they wanted to save her. Dr. Harding gave permission for the MSU RRC to connect the display track to the siding and move the engine over to a part of track near the police station, with the provision that the club provide a bond, remove the fence, stairs, and all of the belongings from the display site, and then tear up the track, put down along with the display track. The club had also had to repair the sidewalk that needed to go through after it was done, and generally clean up the site. Soon the engine was moved, and then they were left with a problem. There was no place to move the engine afterwards. As the MSU Railroad Club was looking for new sites for the engine, the Ann Arbor Railroad had gone bankrupt, and the state of Michigan became the owner of its assets. Hank Lodo spoke to his state senator and arranged for the MSTPR to lease the Owasso engine shop. So the engine was moved to the Owasso engine shop. I probably butchered the name. And then it was a great place to move the engine because it had the equipment needed to restore her. After she was moved to the engine shops in Owasso, 1225 was given a project name, Project 1225, and it was formed in 1978. Chuck Julian then became the president of the club and became the trust's first president. They moved the engine to the complex in 1983. In November of 1985, 1225 moved under her own power for the first time since 1951. The first excursion service happened in 1988, and it was between Owasso and Chinsening, I think that's how you pronounce it. I might be butchering it. And then in 1991, 1225 was used along with Nickel Plate Road 765 to pull a 31-car excursion train during the National Railway Historical Society's annual convention in Huntington, West Virginia. The trust decided to change their name to the Steam Railroading Institute because it was thought that this name better represented the goals of this organization. The official name is still the Michigan State Trust for Railway Preservation. In 2009, 1225 attended the Train Festival, which is basically, it's a whole bunch of trains come and visit. It's just basically trains galore. And they was part of a fundraiser to raise money for 1225's FRA overhaul. However, 1225 was not able to do any of the excursion work for the show as her flues were failing. The flue failing was later repeated on December 5th of that year, so in January 2010, 1225 went down for its required 15-year inspection. On October 20th, 2013, 1225 was fired up for the first time for its first movements under its own power in 4 years. She was back in service by late November 2013. She will run again for another 15 years until 2028 when the next overhaul work is due. As of 2016, 1225 operates excursion trains over the Great Lakes Central Railroad, formerly Tuscola and Saginaw Bay Railway, several times per year, including operations that leave Owasso and going to locations such as Alma, Clare, Mount Pleasant, and Cadillac, Michigan. Since 2004, 1225 has hauled winter weekend excursions to Ashley, Michigan between Thanksgiving and the middle of December, and due to copyright issues, it's known as the North Pole Express, but it's supposed to be the Polar Express. In 1985, Chris Van Allsburg wrote the book The Polar Express. 1225's blueprints, which were saved from oblivion and donated to the MSRU RRC by Hank Truer, were the prototype for the locomotive's image, and its sounds were used in the 2004 film The Polar Express, which was based on the book by Chris Van Allsburg. Now that you know the history of the real Polar Express, let's talk about this model. The Lionel LionChief Polar Express was most recently featured in Lionel's 2016 Ready to Run catalog. As I only bought the locomotive, here are the features for it. It's controlled by the LionChief remote, it has the sound clips from the movie, and it has on and off switches for the smoke and the sound, and it has RailSounds RC with steam chuffing, engine backroom sounds, whistle, bell, and user-activated announcements. Operating headlight, puffing smoke unit, operating reel coupler on the tender, powerful maintenance-free motor, 2 traction tires, diecast metal locomotive body, and a large pilot and headlight lens shield. So I got my old Polar Express here that still runs, but I decided to upgrade. And you can already see some differences between the two. The conventional old one is a little more chunkier compared to the LionChief one, and you can see that the handrails here are actually now molded into the plastic, into the diecast on the LionChief one. Other than that, everything looks the same detail-wise up on front. There's not really much, difference other than the handrails and the size difference. Here along the side of the Polar Express, you can see all the nice running gear, and you can see it's a 284. Up on front and on top of the engine, we have the headlamp, and it's a LED bulb, but it gives the impression of an incandescent bulb. Then we got the swinging bell, smoke unit, where you simply shoot the smoke fluid down the stack to make the smoke unit work. And then we got the whistle, which is separately applied. Now, on the original conventional control locomotive, the handrails are separately applied, but on this model, they're casted in. Up on top of the engine, we have the steam dome, the sand dome, and some pop-off valves. On the roof of the cab, we have some cast-in vents and some nice rivet detail, as well as some posts to put some figures of the Polar Express characters on. Pretty cool. Moving back down the side of the engine, we have a nice crisp 1225, as well as the LionChief drawbar that connects the locomotive to the electronics in the tender. Moving back to the tender, we got a nice crisp Polar Express, along with some nice rivet detail. And on the back and top of the tender, you can see there's a difference between the two tenders. On the original conventional tender, the handrails and all that are separately applied, and on the LionChief one, there are no handrails. Before we get the engine underway, I want to go over the best feature in my opinion. So this engine has a load of features. It's whistle, bell, user announcements, that I don't really have a favorite. I like them all. I love the bell, I love the chuffing sounds, I love the whistle, and I especially love the user announcements. It's actually Tom Hanks speaking through the engine, so it kind of feels like you're in the movie almost. One more thing before I fire the 1225 up. The coaches you see here are the original coaches from the 2004 set. I only bought the engine from eBay, so if you already have the cars, don't buy the set, because there's no point because they're the exact same cars from the 2004 set. But if you don't have the Polar Express set, I recommend buying the entire set because you'll get the cars that way. But if you already have the cars, don't buy the cars. Don't buy the set. Just buy the locomotive. Before I power the engine up, if you guys have seen my LionChief Plus review of the Southern Railway 4501 from LionChief Plus, you'll know that the engine beeps when you power up the throttle. The LionChief engines do not beep when you throttle them up. They just go right into steaming sounds. They make chuffing sounds and all that. So let's go ahead and fire the 1225 up. Here we go. Fire up. Okay, so we have track power, but the remote isn't on, so we do that, and we throw the switch like this. Okay, let's try the whistle. Okay, let's try the bell. Alright, here's some of the announcements.
This is the Polar Express. All aboard! This is the Polar Express.
Alright, let's go ahead and move her on out.
I am the king of the North Pole! One thing about trains, it doesn't matter where they're going. What matters is deciding to get on.
That's it for this review. I hope you guys enjoyed. This train is quite literally the spirit of Christmas itself. If you're interested in picking one of these up, the retail price is $399.99, but that's just for the set. If you already have the passenger cars, you can probably find the locomotive on eBay. I got mine for $198. Well, I'm Future Rail Productions, and I'll see y'all next time.